In this first video, we're going to talk about who the Nazis were in 1933. And I've purposely chose this image because this is the image, this is the moment when this is when he takes power. So in January of 1933, the Nazis get the majority in the Reichstag of seats in the Reichstag, and Hitler is made Chancellor of Germany. And these are the crowds outside Hitler's office as he stands there in the light in his office. Now, I'd like to look at in this video who the Nazis were in 1933, and I'm going to look at two separate issues. Firstly, I'm going to look at the story of how they got into power in 1933. This is something, if you're doing the OCRB course, that you're not going to get tested on, but it's important background knowledge. And secondly, we're going to look at who the Nazi leaders were in 1933. So first off, let's start with the story of how the Nazi Party really came to be in 1933. Now, this story actually doesn't begin in 1933. It begins a lot further back in 1918. And in 1918, the Germans are about to lose the First World War. This is really important for Germany because as a result of them losing the First World War, the country is humiliated, it is depressed, and it's kind of broken as a country. Now, after the First World War, the Allies, the people who win in the First World War, sit down at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris and they decide what they're going to do with Germany. And they put really harsh restrictions on Germany. Firstly, Germany's forced to take the blame for the entirety of the First World War, even though it wasn't just them. The Germans forced to take the blame. As a result of them taking the blame, the Allies are allowed to impose restrictions on them. They heavily restrict their military. So, for example, their armies only allowed 100,000 men. They heavily restrict the amount of land that Germany can own. So lots of German places that were Germany before are now given to other countries. For example, parts of Poland. Now, in addition to that, they are also forced to pay a huge financial sum of something called reparations, which means money to the Allies for the war. And they're forced to pay £6.6 billion, which sounds a lot of money now, but in 1918 was a colossal sum of money. So as a result of the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is extremely depressed, humiliated and broken. And it's in that context that extreme parties start cropping up in Germany. And one of those extreme parties was the National Socialist Party, or, in short, the Nazi Party. So the Nazi Party were an extreme right-wing party that began in that kind of context of Germany being a broken country after the war. And initially, they do okay, and they're really formed in the south of Germany in a place called Bavaria. And in Bavaria in 1923, one of the most important events in the story of the Nazi Party's creation was the Munich Putsch, because they were a very right-wing party, and they decided in 1923 that they were going to try and take power by force. So in 1923, Hitler, who you can see here, and his leaders walk into the middle of Munich and try and take power. Now that event is actually a complete failure, but it's a really important story as part of the Nazi Party, because as a result of that, Hitler is jailed. Now this photo here, I know it doesn't look like much of a jail. You can see that Hitler's sat in his jail cell with freshly cut flowers on with a tablecloth, and really importantly, in jail, Hitler was sort of a celebrity, and he was sort of a celebrity in the courts before he got to jail, as a result of this idea that he was trying to do something different by trying to take power by force. Equally in jail, important for Hitler, Hitler gets time to write his own book, and that book is called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And in that book, Hitler was able to express all of his views very clearly, and then that book was sold to the German people. So jail for Hitler wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Now after a while, after about 6 months, Hitler gets released from jail. And after a 3-year ban, the Nazi Party is relaunched. And it's relaunched again in Germany, and now the Nazi Party are not going to try and take power by force, they're going to try and take power through democracy. But actually the party in the late 1920s is a complete miserable failure. It's a failure because Germany, actually towards the end of the 1920s, is doing really quite well. The Weimar government are running things quite well, the economy is booming, things are going brilliantly. That changes. and it changes really importantly in 1929 when the Wall Street crash happens. And as a result of the Wall Street crash, stock market prices crash globally. This leads to a massive Great Depression, a Great Depression where there is vast unemployment, vast poverty, vast amounts of people being really quite hungry and starving as a result of having no money. And the Great Depression hits Germany worse than most other countries. In that context, the Nazis suddenly start changing their ways. And the Nazis very simply promised those starving, hungry people two things: Arbeit und Brot. Arbeit is work, and Brot is bread. And you can see on the right hand side here that the Nazis suddenly start doing a lot better. 1928, before the Wall Street crash, they were only able to get 12 seats in the Reichstag. By 1930, that jumps to 107. By 1932, you can suddenly see them winning an immense amount of seats in the Reichstag, leading up to 1933, which is where the story we began with in this video, where they get 288 seats. That's the story of how they came to be, and as I said, you're not going to get tested on that, but I think it's important you have that background knowledge. Now, let's have a look at who the leaders were in the Nazi Party then in 1933. And we'll start with this photo here, and this is a photo of the leaders in 33. You probably already know who this man is. This is Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party. He was a very charismatic speaker, passionate and driven. This man to the right of Hitler is Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels was a doctor, and he was in charge of propaganda. He was an extremely clever man who worked out ways of selling the Nazi message to the masses. This man over here, that you can see with some very small glasses on, this is Heinrich Himmler. Himmler was in charge of the SS, the black shirts, and you can see him wearing a black uniform in this picture. Now the SS were one of two armies the Nazis had. They had two. The SS were the elite army, like the best of the best. Now that SS army were the ones who eventually are going to run the terror system and the concentration camps. They're the ones who, if I'm honest, they're the ones who the Nazis are very famous for, because they're the ones who commit awful crimes. This man in the middle with the big coat, this is Hermann Goering, and Hermann Goering was the deputy leader of the Nazi Party. He was an ex-fighter pilot from the First World War, and really he's a big showman, again, a very good speaker. The other man in the middle, you can see right in the middle here, behind Hitler, he ran the other army, the SA, and the SA were the brown shirts. And the SA were the normal army. They were much, much larger in terms of their number of their force and their membership than the SS, and Ernst Röhm is the man who's running them. Finally, this man right in the corner is Rudolf Hess, and Hess was really in charge of the party and its organisation from Munich in South Germany. So who were the Nazi Party in 1933? In this video we've looked at their rise, and we've looked at who those leaders were. A really good way of consolidating your knowledge with this would now be to summarise what you've just learnt in this 8-9 minute video into a chunky paragraph. Good luck.